The dust-laden air of Granite, Colorado clung to Vivian Ross's skin as she stood helplessly watching the stagecoach disappear into the distance, taking with it her entire life packed neatly into 3 matching leather trunks. Her heart sank as the realization dawned that everything she owned, family heirlooms, her mother's wedding dress, the manuscript she'd spent 2 years perfecting, was headed west without her. "Wait," she cried out, her voice drowned by the thundering hooves and creaking wheels. "Please wait." But the stagecoach driver, either deaf to her pleas or too concerned with keeping schedule, continued onward, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust in his wake. Vivian's gloved hand fell to her side as she stood alone at the edge of the small mining town, the autumn wind of 1875 whipping strands of auburn hair across her face. Granite was not what she had expected. The mining town, nestled in the Colorado mountains, was rougher than the letters from her aunt had suggested, a collection of weathered buildings, muddy streets, and hardened faces. And now, without her possessions, Vivian felt even more lost than when she'd first stepped off the eastbound train earlier that morning. "First time in Granite, miss." Vivian turned to find a woman in her 50s watching her from the porch of what appeared to be a general store. Her face was lined with years of mountain sun, but her eyes were kind. "Yes," Vivian replied, struggling to maintain her composure, "and I've just watched all my belongings continue without me." The woman clucked sympathetically. "That'd be Jasper driving. Man's more concerned with schedules than people." She gestured toward the store. "Come in, dear. I'm Martha Wilson. Let's get you sorted." Vivian followed Martha inside, grateful for the kindness of a stranger in this unfamiliar place. The store smelled of coffee, leather, and dried goods, a comforting mix that reminded her that civilization existed even here. "I'm Vivian Ross," she said, removing her gloves. "I've come from Boston to live with my Aunt Harriet Campbell. Do you know her?" Martha nodded. "Everyone knows Miss Harriet. Lives about half a mile north of town, tough as nails but fair-minded." She eyed Vivian's fine traveling suit. "You're a long way from Boston, Miss Ross." "My parents died last winter," Vivian explained, the words still painful despite the months that had passed. "Influenza. Aunt Harriet is my only remaining family, and she kindly offered me a home." "I'm sorry for your loss," Martha said softly. "Now, about your luggage. That stage is headed to Leadville. Won't return for 3 days. Vivian's shoulders slumped. 3 days. "But everything I own is in those trunks." "Well now," came a deep voice from the doorway, "that sounds like a problem that needs solving." Both women turned to see a tall man silhouetted against the bright Colorado sunlight. As he stepped into the store, Vivian took in his appearance. Sun-browned skin, a strong jawline shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wore a cattleman's hat, dusty from the trail, and though his clothes were well worn, they were clean. "Samuel Jackson," Martha said with a hint of relief in her voice. "You've got good timing." The man Samuel tipped his hat to both women. "Mrs. Wilson." His gaze shifted to Vivian, and something in his expression changed, softened for just a moment before his professional demeanor returned. "Madam." "Miss Ross has lost her luggage to Jasper's lead foot," Martha explained. 3 trunks on their way to Leadville." Samuel considered this. "I'm riding that direction tomorrow. Got business with a rancher outside Leadville. Could catch up to the stage, be back day after tomorrow." Vivian's heart leapt at the suggestion, but caution tempered her enthusiasm. "I couldn't possibly ask a stranger to—" "You're not asking, miss. I'm offering," Samuel interrupted gently. He glanced at Martha. "Miss Campbell's niece," Martha nodded. "Then it's settled," he said, as if retrieving a stranger's luggage across mountain terrain was the most natural thing in the world. "I'll need a description of the trunks." They're matching leather, dark brown with brass fittings, Vivian said quickly. My initials VER are embossed on each one. She hesitated. Mr. Jackson, I insist on paying you for your trouble. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. We can discuss that when I return with your belongings, Miss Ross. He turned to Martha. Is Tom still renting out that cabin behind the livery? Martha nodded. It's small but clean. I'll take Miss Ross there while you prepare for tomorrow. Samuel tipped his hat again. I'll be leaving at first light. With luck, I'll catch the stage at their overnight stop in Buena Vista. As he turned to leave, Vivian found her voice. Mr. Jackson. Thank you, truly. His eyes met hers, and for a moment Vivian felt as though she was being carefully studied. Don't thank me yet, Miss Ross. Thank me when your trunks are safely delivered. With that, he was gone, boots echoing on the wooden porch. Martha chuckled softly. That man always was a sucker for a damsel in distress. Vivian bristled slightly. I'm hardly a damsel, Mrs. Wilson. I'm perfectly capable of course you are, dear, Martha interrupted gently. But even capable women sometimes need help, especially in these mountains. She gestured toward the door. Now, let's get you settled and send word to your aunt that you've arrived. As they walked toward the livery stable, Vivian couldn't help glancing in the direction Samuel had gone, wondering about the quiet cowboy who'd so readily offered his assistance. There was something in his storm-gray eyes that suggested depths she couldn't begin to fathom. Despite her predicament, she found herself curious about what might lie beneath his stoic exterior. What she didn't know couldn't have known was that Samuel Jackson was wondering the exact same thing about her. The morning air bit at Samuel's cheeks as he tightened the cinch on his saddle. Dawn was just beginning to touch the eastern horizon, painting the mountains in hues of pink and gold. His breath formed clouds in the cold air, but he knew the day would warm once the sun fully rose. Colorado weather in early autumn was nothing if not changeable. You're a fool, Sam, he muttered to his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Rusty. The animal snorted as if in agreement. Riding all that way for some city girl's fancy trunks. But even as he said it, Samuel knew he'd do it again. There had been something in Miss Ross's eyes, a mixture of strength and vulnerability that had struck him to his core. He'd seen plenty of Eastern women come west, most turning tail at the first hint of hardship. But Vivian Ross had stood tall despite her misfortune, her chin lifted with a determination that spoke volumes. Samuel, he turned to find Martha Wilson approaching, a small package in her hands. Morning, Mrs. Wilson, you're up early. I wanted to catch you before you left. She handed him the package. Some provisions for the road, and this. She passed him a small envelope. Miss Ross insisted. Samuel opened the envelope to find a neatly written note and several dollars. The note read, Mr. Jackson, please accept this advance for your services. I understand the value of one's time and effort and insist on compensating you fairly. I am deeply grateful for your assistance in this matter. Regards, Vivian Ross, stubborn woman, he said with a hint of admiration. Did she sleep at all last night? Martha laughed softly. She was up writing that note when I left her. Said she wouldn't feel right if you didn't take something for your trouble. Samuel tucked the money into his shirt pocket but kept the note, folding it carefully before placing it in his jacket. I'll be back day after tomorrow, weather permitting. Be careful, Sam, Martha said, her motherly concern evident. There's been talk of road agents between here and Leadville. Always am, he assured her, swinging into the saddle. Tell Miss Ross not to worry about her things. I'll bring them back safe. As he rode out of town, the first true rays of sunlight spilled over the mountains. The road to Leadville was well-traveled but not without its dangers: steep mountain passes, unpredictable weather, and occasionally, men with ill intent. But Samuel had been riding these trails for 7 years since returning from the war, and he knew them as well as he knew the lines on his own palm. His thoughts drifted back to Vivian Ross. She was beautiful, certainly, with those amber-flecked green eyes and auburn hair, but it was more than that. There had been an intelligence in her gaze, a spark that suggested she saw more than she let on. Despite his resolve to keep his distance, he'd learned the hard way that mixing with Eastern ladies led nowhere good. He found himself curious about what had brought her to the rugged mining town of Granite. By midday, Samuel had made good progress. The autumn weather held fair, and the trail was dry, allowing for a steady pace. He stopped briefly to rest his horse and eat some of the food Martha had packed: bread, cheese, and jerky, simple but sustaining. As he continued his journey, the landscape changed, growing more dramatic as he climbed higher into the mountains. Aspen trees shimmered gold against the evergreens, their leaves trembling in the mountain breeze. It was beautiful country, wild and untamed. Sometimes Samuel forgot to appreciate it, but today, for some reason, he found himself noticing. "Must be getting soft in my old age," he told Rusty, who flicked an ear back in response. By late afternoon, Samuel reached the summit of the pass that separated the Arkansas River Valley from the headwaters of the South Platte. From here, he could see for miles mountains rolling like waves toward the horizon, valleys carved by ancient glaciers, and far below, the ribbon of road that wound its way to Buena Vista. The descent was steep but manageable. Samuel let Rusty pick his way carefully down the switchbacks, trusting the sure-footed animal more than his own judgment on the treacherous slope. As they reached more level ground, he urged the horse into a trot, aware that daylight was waning. The approach to Buena Vista was marked by scattered homesteads and small ranches, signs of civilization returning after the wilderness of the pass. The town itself was smaller than Granite, but served as an important stop on the Stagecoach route. As Samuel rode in, the last light of day was fading, painting the sky in dramatic purples and oranges. The Stagecoach station was easy to find: a large stable with an adjoining hotel where passengers typically spent the night. Samuel dismounted, tying Rusty to a hitching post before entering the hotel. The lobby was sparsely furnished but clean, with a desk manned by a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose. A few travelers sat in chairs near a small fireplace, and the smell of cooking food wafted from a nearby dining room. "Evening," Samuel said, approaching the desk. "I'm looking for yesterday's stage from Granite. Did it arrive as scheduled?" The clerk looked up from his ledger. "It did." "Left this morning for Leadville." Samuel's heart sank. "Left already? I thought they stayed overnight." "Usually do," the clerk said with a shrug. "But they were running ahead of schedule for once, so the driver decided to push on to Leadville last night. Got in late, I heard." Samuel suppressed a curse. "I need to catch up with that stage. Important business." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Then you'd best get moving at first light. It's a full day's ride to Leadville, and that's pushing it." Samuel nodded, resigned. "Got a room available." "Last one," the clerk said, turning the register toward him. $2, including breakfast." As Samuel signed the book and paid, he couldn't help but think of Vivian Ross, waiting in Granite for her belongings. He'd promised to be back the day after tomorrow, but now that seemed unlikely. The thought bothered him more than it should have. After seeing to Rusty and having a simple meal in the hotel's dining room, Samuel retired to his room. It was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the main street. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out Vivian's note, and read it again. The neat, flowing script spoke of education and refinement. What was she doing coming to a rough place like Granite? "None of your business, Sam," he muttered, putting the note away. But as he stretched out on the bed, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the image of those green eyes, proud and determined despite her predicament. Morning came too soon. Samuel rose before dawn, ate a quick breakfast in the near-empty dining room, and was on the trail as the first hint of light appeared in the sky. The road to Leadville climbed steadily, following the Arkansas River through a valley that grew increasingly narrow and dramatic. The weather held, and Samuel pushed Rusty harder than he might have otherwise, stopping only when necessary to rest the horse. By mid-afternoon, he caught his first glimpse of Leadville, a bustling silver mining town nestled in a high mountain valley at over 10,000 feet above sea level. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, and the sounds of construction echoed across the valley as new buildings sprouted seemingly overnight to accommodate the swelling population. The Stagecoach station in Leadville was considerably larger than the one in Buena Vista, befitting the town's status as a major mining center. Samuel approached the station master, a burly man with an impressive mustache. "I'm looking for yesterday's stage from Granite," Samuel said. "There were 3 leather trunks aboard that I need to retrieve." The station master scratched his chin. "Might be a problem there. Stage arrived last night and passengers claimed their luggage. Anything unclaimed was put in storage, but we had a break-in around midnight. Some items were taken." Samuel's stomach tightened. Was anything recovered? Sheriff rounded up the thieves this morning. Couple of drunk miners who thought they'd find valuables. Got most of the stolen items back, but they'd already sold some. "I need to see what you have," Samuel insisted. The trunks belonged to a lady who got separated from her luggage. Brown leather with brass fittings, initials VER. The station master led Samuel to a storeroom behind the office. "This is what we recovered. Feel free to look through it." The room was crowded with trunks, bags, and packages of various descriptions. Samuel methodically examined each item, his concern growing as he failed to find Vivian's distinctive trunks. Finally, in the corner, partially hidden by a large wooden crate, he spotted a familiar shape. "This is one of them," he said, pulling out a brown leather trunk with brass fittings. The initials VER were clearly visible on the top. Relief flooded through him, but it was short-lived. There was only one trunk, not 3. "Just the one?" the station master asked. Samuel nodded grimly. "There should be 2 more like it. Let me check with the sheriff. If they sold the others, he might know to whom." While the station master went to fetch the sheriff, Samuel examined the recovered trunk. It was locked, the brass hasp secure. At least its contents were likely intact. He ran his hand over the fine leather, wondering what treasures it might contain, what small piece of Vivian Ross's life he had managed to salvage. The sheriff arrived an hour later, a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest and a no-nonsense expression. "Understand you're looking for some stolen luggage," he said without preamble. Samuel explained the situation, describing the missing trunks in detail. "I know exactly which ones you mean," the sheriff said. "My deputies recovered one from a pawn shop on Harrison Avenue. The owner said he bought it from a miner for $5, didn't know it was stolen. The other was found in an alley behind the Silver Dollar Saloon, broken open and emptied." Samuel's heart sank. "Do you have the contents?" The sheriff shook his head. "Some clothing was recovered, badly soiled. A few books, a silver hairbrush. Not much else. Whoever took it was likely looking for valuables." "I need to see what you have," Samuel insisted. "Every item could be important to the lady who owns them." The sheriff led Samuel to the jail, where the recovered items were being kept as evidence. The sight that greeted him was disheartening: dresses trampled in the mud, books with pages torn out, and personal items carelessly tossed aside. He carefully gathered everything that might have belonged to Vivian, his anger growing at the disrespect shown to her possessions. The silver hairbrush was intact, the initials VER engraved on the back confirming its ownership. A small leather-bound book turned out to be a journal, which Samuel set aside without opening. There were a few pieces of jewelry, nothing extravagant, but clearly of sentimental value, and a packet of letters tied with ribbon. "Where's the third trunk?" Samuel asked as he carefully repacked the salvageable items. "That's the problem," the sheriff admitted. "We haven't found it yet." "The thieves claim they only took 2, Samuel frowned. "What about the Stagecoach company? They're responsible for the luggage they carry." "You can file a claim," the sheriff said, "but it could take weeks to process, and there's no guarantee they'll pay." Samuel knew he couldn't wait weeks. Vivian needed her belongings now, and he had promised to return with them. "I'll take what we have and continue looking for the third trunk." After securing the recovered items, one intact trunk, and a satchel of salvaged belongings, Samuel set out to search the town. He visited every pawn shop, second-hand store, and saloon in Leadville, showing a sketch of the trunk and offering a reward for information. By nightfall, his search had yielded nothing but tired feet and growing frustration. As he sat in a small cafe, nursing a cup of coffee, Samuel contemplated his next move. The responsible thing would be to return to Granite with what he had recovered and report the loss to Vivian. But the thought of disappointing her gnawed at him. One more day, he decided. One more day of searching, and then he would head back. The cafe owner, a friendly woman named Edith, noticed his preoccupation. "Troubles, mister?" Samuel explained his quest, showing her the sketch of the missing trunk. "Might want to try Elias Gunderson's place," Edith suggested. "It's not really a shop, more like a trading post out of his home. He deals in all sorts of odds and ends, especially from the mines." With renewed hope, Samuel followed Edith's directions to a small cabin on the outskirts of town. Despite the late hour, a light glowed in the window. He knocked firmly on the door. The man who answered was elderly but spry, with a long white beard and sharp blue eyes. "Help you?" Samuel explained his search, and to his surprise, Gunderson nodded immediately. "Had a fella bring one by yesterday. Fine piece of luggage, too fine for the likes of him. I was suspicious, so I didn't buy it." "You know where he went?" Samuel asked eagerly. "Said something about trying the new hotel, the Clarendon. They buy furnishings sometimes." With a grateful thanks to Gunderson, Samuel hurried to the Clarendon Hotel, an imposing 3-story building that represented Leadville's aspirations to refinement. The night clerk was reluctant to help until Samuel pressed a silver dollar into his palm. "We did purchase a trunk yesterday," the clerk admitted. "For a guest room, it's quite handsome." "I need to see it," Samuel insisted. The clerk led him to a storage room where new furnishings awaited placement. There, among chairs and small tables, was Vivian's third trunk. The relief Samuel felt was almost dizzying. "This trunk was stolen," he explained to the now alarmed clerk. "I need to return it to its rightful owner." After some negotiation and the exchange of more silver dollars than Samuel had intended to spend, he secured the trunk. It was locked like the first one, its contents presumably intact. With all 3 trunks now in his possession, one intact, one empty but with its contents partially recovered, and one apparently untouched, Samuel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The hour was late, but he had fulfilled his promise. Tomorrow he would begin the journey back to Granite, back to Vivian Ross. As he settled into his room at a modest boarding house, Samuel found himself wondering again about the woman whose possessions he had tracked across the mountains. What was in these trunks that was so important to her? What kind of life had she left behind in Boston? And why did he care so much about a woman he had barely met? Questions without answers swirled in his mind as he drifted off to sleep, his dreams filled with green eyes and the mystery of Vivian Ross. The dawn broke clear and cold as Samuel loaded the trunks onto a small wagon he'd purchased for the return journey. Rusty would pull it, and while it would slow their progress, it was the only way to transport all 3 trunks back to Granite. "You've earned an extra ration of oats for this," he told the horse as he secured the harness. Rusty snorted, seemingly unimpressed by the promise. The journey back would take at least 2 days, possibly 3 with the added weight of the wagon. Samuel had sent a telegram to Martha Wilson, asking her to inform Miss Ross that he had recovered most of her belongings and was on his way back. He hoped it would ease her mind. The road out of Leadville wound down from the high mountain valley, following the Arkansas River through a landscape of breathtaking beauty. Aspen groves shimmered gold in the autumn sunlight, and the distant peaks wore fresh caps of early snow. Under different circumstances, Samuel might have enjoyed the journey more, but his mind was focused on returning to Granite as quickly as possible. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds began gathering over the mountains, and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Samuel pushed on, hoping to reach a way station he knew was several miles ahead before the storm hit. The first fat drops of rain began falling as the way station came into view, a sturdy log structure that offered simple accommodations for travelers. Samuel urged Rusty to a faster pace, and they reached the shelter just as the heavens opened in earnest. The station keeper, a grizzled old-timer named Hank, helped Samuel unhitch Rusty and get the trunks inside. "Just you tonight," Hank said as they settled in the main room. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting warm light over the rough-hewn furniture. Rest of the folks had the sense to stay put when they saw them clouds building. Samuel smiled wryly. "Never claimed to be sensible." "Must be important business to be out in weather like this," Hank observed, serving up a bowl of hearty stew from the pot hanging over the fire. "Just returning some lost property," Samuel said, downplaying his mission. Hank raised an eyebrow. 3 fancy trunks is quite a lot of lost property." "Someone important missing them." Samuel thought about how to answer. Was Vivian Ross important? Not in the way Hank meant she wasn't wealthy or influential as far as he knew. But there was something about her that had compelled him to undertake this journey, to search tirelessly for her belongings. "Yes," he said finally. "Someone important." Hank seemed to understand that the conversation was over. He retreated to his small room off the main area, leaving Samuel alone with his thoughts and the sound of rain hammering on the roof. As the evening wore on, Samuel found himself drawn to the trunks, particularly the one that had been broken into. The thieves had damaged the lock beyond repair, and it now sat partially open. He had no intention of prying into Vivian's personal belongings, but as he adjusted the satchel of recovered items, a book fell out, landing open on the floor. As he picked it up, he realized it was not a published book but a handwritten manuscript. The title page read "Westward Hearts" by V.E. Ross. Intrigued despite himself, Samuel read the first paragraph. The mountains rose before her like sentinels, majestic and imposing, their snow-capped peaks touching the very heavens. Clara felt both terror and exhilaration, as the train carried her closer to her new life, a life she had chosen. Despite the protestations of family and friends who believed a young woman had no business traveling alone to the untamed frontier. Samuel closed the book quickly, feeling as though he had intruded on something private. But the words lingered in his mind. Was Vivian Ross a writer? The prose was evocative, painting a picture he recognized all too well, the mixture of fear and excitement that accompanied a journey into the unknown. He carefully returned the manuscript to the satchel, but thoughts of Vivian continued to occupy his mind as he stretched out on the simple cot. What kind of woman wrote stories about the frontier while traveling to it herself? And why did the idea intrigue him so much? The storm passed during the night, leaving behind a washed, clean world that sparkled in the morning sunlight. Samuel set out early, eager to make up for time lost to the weather. The road was muddy but passable, and Rusty pulled the wagon steadily, seemingly understanding the importance of their mission. By nightfall, they had made good progress, reaching the small settlement of Buena Vista once again. Samuel secured lodging at the same hotel, ensuring the trunks were safely stored before seeing to Rusty's needs. As he sat in the hotel dining room, he overheard a conversation that made him pause mid-bite. "Lady from Boston, real refined type, looking for her luggage," a stagecoach driver was saying to his companion. "Offered a reward for anyone who could find it." Samuel set down his fork and approached the table. "Excuse me," he said. "This lady was her name Ross, Vivian Ross." The driver looked up in surprise. "That's right, you know her. I'm retrieving her luggage," Samuel explained. "3 trunks that were mistakenly carried on to Leadville." The driver's eyes widened. "Well, I'll be. She's here in town, arrived on today's eastbound stage. Said she couldn't just sit in Granite waiting, had to take action herself." Samuel couldn't help but smile. It was exactly the kind of determined behavior he'd expected from Vivian Ross. "Where is she staying?" "This very hotel, I believe," the driver said. "Room 7, if I heard correctly." Samuel thanked the man and returned to his meal, his mind racing. Vivian was here in the same building. He should inform her that her trunks were safe, that he had fulfilled his promise. But something held him back, perhaps the desire to see her expression when he returned all 3 trunks to her in person. Or perhaps the simple wish to maintain the mystery a little longer. In the end, he decided to continue as planned. He would leave at first light and return to Granite. If Vivian was following the stagecoach route backward, searching for her luggage, they would likely pass on the road tomorrow. The thought both excited and unsettled him. Morning came with a clear sky and the promise of fair weather. Samuel loaded the trunks onto the wagon and set out, his senses alert for any sign of an eastbound stagecoach that might be carrying Vivian Ross. Around midday, as he navigated a particularly narrow section of road that hugged the mountainside, Samuel heard the distant rumble of an approaching coach. He pulled the wagon as far to the side as safety allowed, waiting for the vehicle to pass. The stagecoach appeared around a bend, moving at a good clip despite the challenging terrain. As it drew closer, Samuel could make out the passengers inside 3 men in business attire and a single woman. Even through the dust-streaked window, there was no mistaking those auburn hair and proud posture. Vivian Ross. Samuel raised his hand in greeting as the coach approached. The driver, recognizing a fellow traveler, slowed the team. "Road clear ahead," the driver called out. "All clear," Samuel confirmed, his eyes fixed on the coach window where Vivian sat. She was looking at him, her expression changing from polite interest to shock, and then was it joy? As recognition dawned, before the driver could urge the horses forward, she was calling for him to stop. "Mr. Jackson," she exclaimed, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. Are those my trunks?" Samuel couldn't help the smile that spread across his face. "All 3 of them, Miss Ross, though one has seen better days." The coach door flew open, and Vivian descended without waiting for assistance, her practical traveling dress swishing around her ankles as she approached the wagon. Her eyes were alight with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "You found them," she said, reaching out to touch the nearest trunk as if to confirm it was real. "All of them." "I promised I would," Samuel said simply. The stagecoach driver cleared his throat impatiently. "Miss, we're on a schedule." Vivian glanced back at the coach, then at her trunks, clearly torn. "I'm headed back to Granite," Samuel offered. "I can bring you and your trunks together." She hesitated only briefly before nodding decisively. "Yes, please." She turned to the driver. "Sir, I'll be continuing my journey with Mr. Jackson. Could you please help with my valise?" The driver looked between them, skepticism written on his weathered face. "Madam, are you sure that's wise? You hardly know this fella." "I know that he kept his word and found what was lost," Vivian replied firmly. "I trust him to see me safely back to Granite." Something warm unfurled in Samuel's chest at her words. Trust was not given lightly in the West, especially by a woman alone. That Vivian would place such faith in him based on a single fulfilled promise spoke volumes about her character. With her valise retrieved and farewells said to her fellow passengers, Vivian found herself seated beside Samuel on the wagon's bench. The stagecoach continued on its eastward journey, leaving them alone on the mountain road. "I can't believe you found all three," Vivian said, breaking the slightly awkward silence that had fallen between them. "When the telegraph arrived saying you'd recovered most of my belongings, I feared the worst." Samuel explained about the theft in Leadville, the recovery of the 2 trunks, and his search for the third. "I'm afraid one was broken into," he admitted. "I salvaged what I could, but some items may be lost or damaged." To his surprise, Vivian laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that transformed her face. "Mr. Jackson, the fact that you went to such lengths to recover my possessions is nothing short of miraculous. A few damaged items are a small price to pay." As they traveled, the initial awkwardness between them melted away. Vivian proved to be an engaging conversationalist, her intelligence and curiosity evident in the questions she asked about the landscape they passed through, the history of the mining towns, and the nature of life in the Colorado Territory. "Is it true you're a writer?" Samuel asked during a pause in their conversation. Vivian looked startled. "How did you—" "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "One of your trunks was open and I saw a manuscript. I didn't read it well, just a paragraph." A flush colored her cheeks. "Yes, I write. Novels primarily." "Nothing published yet, but I'm hopeful." She glanced at him. "Does that seem foolish to you? A woman writing stories about the West without ever having seen it until now." "Not foolish," Samuel said thoughtfully. "Brave, I'd say. To imagine a world you've never seen and put it into words for others to experience, that takes courage." Vivian studied him with new interest. "Most men I've known would laugh at such ambitions." "I'm not most men, Miss Ross." "No," she agreed softly. "I don't believe you are." The day wore on, and they made good progress despite the added weight of a passenger. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Samuel guided the wagon off the main road toward a small clearing near a stream. "We'll camp here tonight," he said, helping Vivian down from the wagon. "It's too far to make it to Granite before dark." Vivian surveyed their surroundings, the clear stream, the shelter of tall pines, the soft grass underfoot. "It's beautiful," she said, "like something from a painting." While Samuel tended to Rusty and gathered wood for a fire, Vivian opened one of her intact trunks and retrieved a woolen shawl against the evening chill. She moved with a practical efficiency that belied her refined appearance, helping to arrange stones for the fire ring and unpacking the provisions Martha had supplied for Samuel's journey. As darkness fell, they sat beside the crackling fire, their faces warmed by its glow. The stars emerged overhead, countless diamonds scattered across the velvet sky. Samuel prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and coffee, apologizing for its plainness. After 2 days of Stagecoach station food, this is a feast, Vivian assured him, accepting the tin plate with gratitude. They ate in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness, the murmur of the stream, the occasional hoot of an owl, the whisper of wind through the pines. "May I ask what brought you to Granite?" Samuel said finally, his curiosity getting the better of him. "It's not exactly the kind of place most Boston ladies would choose." Vivian set down her empty plate and wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "After my parents died, I found myself at a crossroads. Boston held nothing for me but memories and the expectations of society, marriage to a suitable gentleman, a quiet life of social calls and charitable work." She looked up at the stars. "I've always longed for something more meaningful. My aunt's invitation came at the perfect moment." "And your writing?" Samuel prompted gently. A small smile played at her lips. "My writing has always been my escape, my way of experiencing adventures I never thought I'd have in reality. Now, perhaps, I can write about the West from personal experience rather than imagination." "I think you'll find plenty of material here," Samuel said, adding a log to the fire. "Though perhaps not all of it suitable for a lady's novel." Vivian laughed. "Mr. Jackson, you might be surprised by what ladies include in their novels these days." Her expression grew more serious. "May I ask you something in return?" Samuel nodded, preparing himself for the usual questions about his past, whether he had fought in the war, whether he had killed men, the kind of questions Easterners typically asked when they discovered he had once ridden with a Texas cavalry unit. "Why did you do this?" Vivian asked instead, gesturing to the trunk secured in the wagon. "Go to such lengths for a stranger's possessions?" The question caught him off guard. Samuel stared into the fire, considering his answer. "I gave my word," he said finally. "Out here that means something." "Is that all?" Vivian pressed, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. Samuel met her gaze. "No," he admitted. "There was something about you standing there in Granite, watching your life disappear down the road. You didn't cry or fall apart. You stood tall, ready to face whatever came next." He looked away, suddenly self-conscious. "I admired that." Silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but charged with unspoken thoughts. Eventually, Samuel rose to his feet. "We should rest. It's a full day's journey back to Granite tomorrow." He arranged a bedroll for Vivian near the fire, offering her his own blanket for added warmth. For himself, he would use his saddle as a pillow and his coat as a covering. "Good night, Mr. Jackson," Vivian said softly as she settled onto her makeshift bed. "Samuel," he corrected. "After all we've been through, I think you can call me Samuel." Her smile was the last thing he saw before turning away to his own sparse accommodations. "Good night, Samuel, and thank you for everything." As Samuel lay looking up at the stars, he realized that in retrieving Vivian's possessions, he had found something unexpected for himself, a connection to another person that went beyond mere acquaintance or obligation. It was too soon to name this feeling, too soon to acknowledge the warmth that spread through him when she smiled or the way his pulse quickened when their eyes met. But it was there, undeniable as the stars overhead. Tomorrow they would return to Granite, and Vivian would begin her new life. Samuel would return to his own routines, the cattle drives, the occasional work as a guide, the solitary existence he had grown accustomed to after the war. But something had changed. Some door had opened that he wasn't sure he could close again. With these thoughts circling in his mind, Samuel drifted into sleep, lulled by the gentle sounds of the wilderness and the soft rhythm of Vivian's breathing nearby. Morning arrived with a chorus of birdsong and the gentle warmth of early sunlight filtering through the pines. Samuel woke first, taking a moment to appreciate the peaceful scene, before rising quietly to rekindle the fire and prepare coffee. Vivian stirred as the aroma of brewing coffee filled the air. She sat up, her auburn hair tumbling around her shoulders, momentarily disoriented until her gaze fell on Samuel tending the fire. "Good morning," she said, her voice still husky with sleep. "Morning," Samuel replied, offering her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. There's something soothing about sleeping under the stars. They shared a simple breakfast of leftover biscuits and jerky, talking easily as they prepared for the day's journey. Vivian returned to her trunk for a brush, tidying her hair and securing it in a practical style, more suited to travel than fashion. As they continued their journey to Granite, the landscape grew familiar to Samuel, the distinctive peaks that marked the approach to town, the winding path of the Arkansas River, the scattered mines and homesteads that preceded the settlement proper. Beside him, Vivian took it all in with eager attention, occasionally asking questions about landmarks or pointing out particularly beautiful vistas. "Is that Granite?" she asked as they crested a rise and a collection of buildings came into view in the valley below. "That's it," Samuel confirmed. "Not much to look at compared to Boston, I imagine." Vivian considered the modest mining town with its wooden buildings and muddy Main Street. "It has its own kind of beauty," she said thoughtfully. "It feels real, honest." Her perception surprised him. Most Easterners saw only the rough edges of frontier towns, the lack of amenities and refinement. That Vivian could look beyond the surface and find something to appreciate spoke to her character. As they approached the outskirts of town, Samuel became aware of how they might appear to others, a man and woman arriving together after being absent for days, clearly having traveled alone. Reputation was a fragile thing, especially for a woman new to a small community. "Miss Ross," he began carefully, "when we reach town, it might be best if I take you directly to your aunt's home. People talk, and I wouldn't want to compromise my reputation." Vivian finished with a small smile. "You're very considerate, Samuel, but I'm not overly concerned with gossip. You've done me an immeasurable service, and I won't pretend otherwise to satisfy small minds." Her directness was refreshing, if a bit naive about the realities of frontier society. "All the same," Samuel insisted, "your aunt might have concerns." Vivian conceded the point with a graceful nod. "Very well. To my aunt's house first." They entered Granite just as the town was coming fully to life, shopkeepers opening for business and miners heading to their shifts. Several people called greetings to Samuel, their curious gazes lingering on Vivian and the loaded wagon. Martha Wilson emerged from her general store as they passed, her face lighting up with relief. "You're back," she exclaimed, hurrying to meet them. "And with all the trunks, I see. Well done, Samuel." "It was quite the adventure," Vivian said warmly. Mr. Jackson went above and beyond what anyone could have expected. Martha's knowing gaze moved between them, taking in their easy rapport. "I sent word to your aunt yesterday when I received Samuel's telegram," she told Vivian. "She's expecting you." With Martha's directions, they continued to the north edge of town, where Harriet Campbell's house stood, a sturdy two-story structure with a wide porch and carefully tended garden. Even before they reached the gate, the front door opened, and a tall, silver-haired woman emerged. Harriet Campbell was in her 60s, with a straight back and keen eyes that missed nothing. She watched their approach with an expression that mingled relief and wariness. "Aunt Harriet," Vivian called as Samuel helped her down from the wagon. "I've arrived at last, with all my worldly possessions intact thanks to Mr. Jackson." Harriet descended the porch steps with surprising agility, embracing her niece briefly before turning her assessing gaze on Samuel. "Mr. Jackson, I understand I owe you a debt of gratitude for retrieving my niece's belongings." Samuel removed his hat respectfully. "No debt, madam. I was happy to help. And for returning my niece safely as well, it seems," Harriet added with an arch of her eyebrow. "We encountered each other on the road back from Leadville," Vivian explained quickly. "Mr. Jackson has been the perfect gentleman." Harriet's expression softened slightly. "Well then, you must stay for dinner, Mr. Jackson, once you've helped bring those trunks inside, of course." It was not a request, but a command, delivered with the authority of a woman accustomed to being obeyed. Samuel found himself agreeing before he had fully considered the implications. With the help of Harriet's handyman, a taciturn older man named Frank, Samuel unloaded the trunks and carried them to the upstairs bedroom that had been prepared for Vivian. The room was simply furnished but comfortable, with a large window overlooking the garden and distant mountains. "This is lovely," Vivian said as she surveyed her new accommodations. "Thank you for bringing everything up, Samuel." He set down the last trunk, suddenly aware that they were alone in her bedroom, a situation that would be scandalous in polite society. "I should go," he said, reaching for the door. "Will you really come back for dinner?" Vivian asked, a hint of vulnerability in her question. Samuel paused, one hand on the doorknob. "Do you want me to?" "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that very much." Her honesty deserved the same in return. "Then I'll be here." As Samuel descended the stairs, he found Harriet waiting for him in the hallway, her expression unreadable. "A word, Mr. Jackson, before you go." She led him to a small study lined with bookshelves, closing the door behind them. "I understand you went to considerable trouble to recover my niece's belongings." "It was the right thing to do," Samuel said, uncomfortable with what felt like an interrogation. Harriet studied him thoughtfully. "You're not what I expected, Mr. Jackson." "Madam." "Martha Wilson speaks highly of you," Harriet continued. "Says you're honest and hardworking, not given to drink or gambling, fought for the Confederacy but bear no grudges." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Wilson is kind. She also mentions you keep to yourself. Have little to do with the social life of the town." Harriet's gaze was penetrating. "Yet you went chasing after a stranger's luggage across 2 counties. He wasn't sure what response she was looking for. Your niece needed help." A small smile touched Harriet's lips. "Indeed she did. And now I find myself in need of your insights. Vivian is dear to me, but Boston did not prepare her for life in a place like Granite. She has romantic notions about the West that could lead to difficulties." "Miss Ross seems quite capable," Samuel observed. "Determined." "Oh, she's determined," Harriet agreed. "And intelligent and kind-hearted, but also sheltered in many ways." She fixed him with a stern look. "I won't have her hurt, Mr. Jackson, not by this harsh land and not by any man." The implication was clear. "I have no intention of hurting your niece, madam. Intentions are one thing, actions another." Harriet moved to the door. "Dinner is at 6. Don't be late." As Samuel left the Campbell house, his mind was a whirl of conflicting thoughts. Harriet's protective stance was understandable. A young woman newly arrived from the East would be vulnerable in many ways, and not all men had honorable intentions. But the suggestion that he might pose a danger to Vivian, or was that really what Harriet had been saying? He returned to the small room he rented behind the livery stable, washing away the dust of travel and changing into his cleanest shirt. As he shaved carefully, studying his reflection in the small mirror, Samuel confronted an uncomfortable truth. He was going to unusual lengths to make a good impression, and it wasn't for Harriet Campbell's benefit. Vivian Ross had somehow worked her way under his skin in the space of just a few days. Her intelligence, her courage, her unguarded smile all had combined to create an impression he couldn't shake. It was foolish, he told himself. She was an educated Eastern lady with ambitions to be a published author. He was a former Confederate soldier turned cowboy with little formal education and fewer prospects. What could possibly come of such an unlikely connection? And yet, as the hour approached 6, Samuel found himself walking back to the Campbell house, a small bouquet of late wildflowers in hand that he had gathered from a meadow outside town. Harriet answered his knock, her eyebrows rising at the sight of the flowers. "How thoughtful," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice as she accepted them. "Vivian is in the parlor. We'll eat shortly." The parlor was a comfortable room with well-worn furniture that spoke of practical tastes rather than ostentation. Vivian stood near the fireplace, wearing a simple blue dress that complemented her auburn hair, which was now neatly arranged in a style that managed to be both proper and flattering. "You came," she said, her face brightening. "I said I would." Samuel remained near the doorway, suddenly uncertain of his place in this domestic scene. Vivian gestured to a nearby chair. "Please sit. Aunt Harriet has gone to put your flowers in water. They're beautiful, by the way. Thank you." As they talked, Samuel found himself relaxing despite the unfamiliar surroundings. Vivian had a gift for making others comfortable, asking questions that showed genuine interest and sharing her own thoughts with refreshing candor. "I've been exploring the house," she told him. "Aunt Harriet has the most wonderful library, books on local history, natural sciences, even some poetry. And she's agreed to let me use the small sunroom as a writing space." "You'll continue your novel then?" Vivian nodded eagerly, with new inspiration. "Already I've seen so much that I want to capture the vastness of the landscape, the quality of the light, the resilience of the people." Her eyes met his. "Some stories write themselves if you're paying attention." Something in her gaze made Samuel wonder if he was part of the story she saw unfolding. Before he could pursue the thought, Harriet called them to dinner. The meal was simple but well-prepared: roast chicken, root vegetables, fresh bread, and a berry cobbler for dessert. The conversation flowed easily as Harriet shared stories of her 20 years in Granite, from its early days as a mining camp to its current state as a proper, if modest, town. "You arrived at an interesting time, Vivian," Harriet said as she poured coffee after the meal. "The town council is finally taking steps to establish a proper school. Until now, children have been taught by whoever was willing, mostly the minister's wife or Mrs. Wilson when she can spare the time." "A school?" Vivian leaned forward with interest. "That's wonderful news." "Will they be hiring a teacher?" Samuel watched as understanding dawned on Harriet's face. "You're interested in the position?" "I taught for 2 years at a girls' academy in Boston," Vivian explained, her enthusiasm evident. "It was one of the few respectable occupations available to me, and I found I enjoyed it immensely." Harriet considered this information. The position would not pay well, at least not initially, and the conditions would be primitive compared to what you're accustomed to. "I didn't come west expecting luxury," Vivian said with a smile, "and having a purpose beyond my writing would be welcome." As the women discussed the potential teaching position, Samuel found himself imagining Vivian in this new role, sharing her knowledge with the children of miners and merchants, bringing her Eastern education to bear in a frontier classroom. The image fit her in a way he hadn't expected. When the meal concluded, Harriet excused herself to attend to some correspondence, leaving Samuel and Vivian alone in the parlor once more. An expectant silence fell between them. "I should go," Samuel said finally, rising from his chair. "You must be tired after our journey." Vivian stood as well, smoothing her skirts. "I wanted to thank you properly, Samuel, for everything you've done." "There's no need, there is," she insisted gently. "You went far beyond what anyone would expect for a stranger. Because of you, I have not only my possessions but also the manuscript I've worked on for years. I can never repay such kindness." Samuel felt a flush of embarrassment at her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Vivian said with quiet certainty. "They wouldn't have." She stepped closer, her green eyes searching his face. "I hope. That is, I would like us to be friends, Samuel, if that's something you'd want as well. Friends." The word was both a promise and a limitation. "I'd like that," he said, aware of the inadequacy of the response but unable to offer more. Vivian walked him to the door. On the porch, the evening air was cool and fragrant with the scent of pine. In the distance, the mountains were silhouetted against a sky painted with the last colors of sunset. "Good night, Samuel," Vivian said softly. "Good night, Vivian." He hesitated, then added, "I'm glad you found your way to Granite." Her smile in response stayed with him long after he had returned to his simple room, long after the town had quieted for the night. As he lay on his narrow bed, Samuel acknowledged the truth he had been avoiding. Vivian Ross had awakened feelings he had thought long dormant. Feelings that complicated the simple existence he had carefully constructed for himself after the war. "Friends," she had said. It was a beginning, perhaps. But as Samuel drifted toward sleep, he wondered if it could ever be enough. The weeks that followed brought changes to Granite that few could have predicted. Vivian Ross, with her Eastern education and quiet determination, became a central figure in town life almost overnight. When the school board, comprised of the town's most prominent men, interviewed her for the teaching position, they were so impressed by her knowledge and enthusiasm that they hired her on the spot. The school itself was a simple affair, a single room in a newly constructed building that would eventually house the town offices as well. With limited resources but boundless creativity, Vivian transformed the bare space into an inviting classroom. She organized the town's children into groups based on age and ability, created a lending library from her own books and donations from townspeople, and instituted a weekly community day, when parents and other adults were invited to share practical skills with the students. Samuel watched these developments from a distance, his work taking him away from Granite for days at a time as he helped local ranchers with cattle drives and hunting expeditions. But he found himself returning to town more frequently than his business strictly required, drawn by the possibility of encountering Vivian on her way to or from the school, or during her weekend visits to Martha Wilson's store. Their meetings were brief but meaningful moments of connection amid their separate lives. Vivian always had a story to share about her students or a question about some aspect of frontier life that had sparked her curiosity. Samuel found himself looking forward to these exchanges, preparing answers to questions she might ask, noticing details on his travels that he thought might interest her. "You're sweet on the schoolteacher," Martha observed one day as Samuel lingered in her store, ostensibly examining a new shipment of work gloves, but actually watching through the window as Vivian spoke with a group of mothers outside the church. "We're friends," Samuel said, the now familiar phrase feeling increasingly inadequate. Martha snorted. "Friends don't stare at each other like they're trying to memorize each other's faces." Samuel abandoned the pretense of shopping. "She's an educated lady from Boston. I'm a former rebel soldier who can barely write a proper letter. What could I possibly offer her?" Martha's expression softened. "Oh, Samuel, for a man who can track a missing trunk across the mountains, you're remarkably blind to what's right in front of you." Before he could respond, the bell over the door jingled, and Vivian herself entered, bringing with her the crisp scent of autumn air and a smile that seemed to brighten the entire store. "Samuel, I thought that was your horse outside," she said, her pleasure at seeing him evident in her voice. "Are you just back from the Hendersons' ranch?" He nodded, suddenly aware of Martha's knowing gaze. "Got in late last night. They're running more cattle than they can handle, needed help with the autumn roundup." "It sounds fascinating," Vivian said, leaning against the counter. "I've been telling my students about ranching operations, but I'm afraid my knowledge is mostly theoretical. I'd love to see one in action someday." "That could be arranged," Samuel found himself saying. "The Hendersons are good people. They might welcome a visit from the town's teacher and her students." Vivian's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "A field trip. What a wonderful idea. The children would be thrilled, and it would bring their lessons to life." She touched his arm briefly. "Would you help me organize it? You know the Hendersons and understand what would be safe and educational for the children." The request was practical, reasonable, a friend asking for assistance with a professional matter. Yet the warmth of her hand through his shirt sleeve and the eager light in her eyes suggested something more, at least to Samuel's hopeful heart. "Of course," he agreed. "I'm heading back there next week. I'll speak to Mr. Henderson then." Their conversation continued, moving from the proposed field trip to Vivian's ongoing writing project, which she was now adapting based on her experiences in Colorado. Samuel noticed that she seemed more animated when discussing her novel, her hands gesturing expressively, and her cheeks flushed with enthusiasm. "I've completely rewritten the opening chapters," she told him. "My heroine is still from the East, but she's less naive now, more aware of the genuine challenges and rewards of frontier life." "Sounds like someone I know," Samuel said with a smile. Vivian laughed, a sound that never failed to warm him from within. "Well, they do say to write what you know. Though I'm taking some liberties with the romantic elements, making them a bit more dramatic than my own rather uneventful life in that regard." There was a question in her statement, an opening that Samuel recognized but wasn't sure how to answer. Before he could formulate a response, the door opened again, admitting Harriet Campbell. "There you are, Vivian," Harriet said briskly. "I thought we were meeting at the church to discuss the Thanksgiving pageant." "Oh, I completely lost track of time," Vivian exclaimed, gathering her purchases. "Samuel and I were discussing a possible field trip for my students to the Henderson Ranch." Harriet's gaze moved between them, assessing. "Were you indeed? Well, don't let me interrupt your educational planning." Despite her words, she remained firmly in place, a clear indication that the private conversation was over. Vivian gave Samuel an apologetic smile. "I should go, but please let me know what the Hendersons say about the visit." "I will," he promised, tipping his hat to both women as they departed. When they were gone, Martha shook her head with exasperation. That woman, watching over her niece like a hawk guards a chick. "She's protective," Samuel acknowledged. "Can't blame her for that." "There's protective and then there's interfering," Martha countered. "Vivian's a grown woman, fully capable of making her own decisions about who she spends time with." The implication made Samuel uncomfortable. "Mrs. Campbell has been nothing but courteous to me." "Oh, she's courteous to everyone," Martha said with a wave of her hand. "But have you noticed she always appears when you and Vivian are alone together? Always has some errand or meeting that requires Vivian's immediate attention." Samuel had noticed, though he'd attributed it to coincidence rather than design. "What are you suggesting?" Martha leaned across the counter, lowering her voice confidentially. "Harriet Campbell may seem like a progressive-minded spinster who came west for adventure, but she's still a product of her upbringing. In her mind, A former Confederate soldier with no family connections and limited prospects is not a suitable match for her well-bred niece. The assessment stung, though Samuel couldn't deny its probable accuracy. "Then she has nothing to worry about," he said stiffly, "since I haven't made any improper advances toward Miss Ross." Martha straightened, fixing him with a penetrating look. "And that's exactly the problem, Samuel Jackson. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem stacked against you." The conversation lingered in Samuel's mind as he prepared for his return to the Henderson ranch. Martha's words had forced him to confront feelings he'd been trying to ignore: his growing attachment to Vivian, his desire for something beyond friendship, and the seemingly insurmountable obstacles to such a relationship. Yet as he rode out of Granite the following morning, Samuel found his resolve strengthening. Vivian Ross had awakened something in him that had been dormant since the war: hope for a future that included more than just survival, hope for a life that included love and family and purpose. Whether or not such a future was possible remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, Samuel found himself willing to fight for it. The Henderson ranch sprawled across a broad valley flanked by pine-covered hills, a prosperous operation that had grown steadily since John Henderson had claimed the land in the early 1860s. Samuel had worked for the Hendersons intermittently for several years, appreciating their fair treatment and no-nonsense approach to ranching. John Henderson greeted Samuel with his usual gruff warmth. "Back already, Jackson? Thought you'd be spending more time in town now that the pretty schoolteacher has taken a shine to you." News traveled fast in cattle country. "I'm here on business, Mr. Henderson. Partly yours, partly the school's, over a hearty meal prepared by Mrs. Henderson." Samuel explained Vivian's idea for a field trip. The Hendersons warmed to the concept immediately. "Our Joseph would certainly pay more attention to his lessons if they included real cattle," Mrs. Henderson said, referring to their youngest son, who at 10 was more interested in horses than books. "And we could use some goodwill from the townspeople," her husband added. "Might make them more understanding next time our cattle wander too close to their gardens." With the Hendersons' enthusiastic approval secured, Samuel spent the next several days working the ranch, his body engaged in the familiar rhythms of cattle work while his mind often strayed to thoughts of Vivian. By the time he returned to Granite the following week, he had a plan for the field trip that balanced educational value with safety and practicality. He found Vivian at the schoolhouse, working late on a Friday afternoon. The room was empty of students but full of evidence of learning: maps and charts on the walls, rows of neat desks, a blackboard covered with Vivian's elegant handwriting. She looked up from her desk as he entered, her face lighting with pleasure. "Samuel, you're back." "Just got in," he confirmed, removing his hat. "The Hendersons are on board with your field trip idea. They're actually quite excited about it." Vivian clapped her hands together in delight. "That's wonderful news. I've been thinking about all the different aspects of ranching. We could explore the business side for the older students, the animal husbandry for those interested in natural sciences, even the domestic operations that Mrs. Henderson oversees." Her enthusiasm was contagious, and Samuel found himself smiling as he pulled up a chair beside her desk. Together, they outlined a plan for the visit: a full day at the ranch with different activities for different age groups, a simple lunch provided by the parents, and transportation arranged through a combination of wagons and horses. As they worked, Samuel became increasingly aware of their physical proximity: the brush of her sleeve against his arm, the fresh scent of soap and lavender that emanated from her skin, the graceful movement of her hands as she wrote notes in her neat script. It was a kind of sweet torture, being so close yet maintaining the careful distance of friendship. "You seem to know exactly what will interest the children," Vivian observed as they finalized the schedule. "You'd make a fine teacher yourself, Samuel." He laughed at the notion. Afraid my own schooling was too irregular for that. War interrupted what little formal education I had. Vivian's expression grew thoughtful. The war robbed so many of so much. She hesitated, then asked softly, "Do you mind my asking about your experiences? You never speak of them." Samuel was silent for a long moment, considering. He rarely discussed the war, finding most people either too eager to glorify it or too quick to judge those who had fought for the South. But Vivian's question seemed born of genuine interest rather than morbid curiosity or prejudgment. "I was 18 when I joined up," he said finally. "Too young to understand what I was really fighting for, beyond vague notions of defending home and honor. By the time I figured out the truth of it, that poor men were dying to protect the interests of rich men who owned slaves, I was deep in it, just trying to keep myself and my friends alive." Vivian listened without interruption, her green eyes focused intently on his face. "After Gettysburg, I knew the cause was lost," Samuel continued, "but I couldn't desert, wouldn't leave my unit to fight on without me, so I stayed until the surrender at Appomattox." He looked down at his hands, calloused and strong from years of physical labor. "Came west afterward like a lot of former soldiers. Seemed like a place where a man could start fresh, where what mattered was what you did now, not what side you'd fought on." "And has it been a fresh start?" Vivian asked gently. Samuel met her gaze. "Mostly. Though some ghosts are harder to outrun than others." "Thank you for telling me," she said, her hand moving to cover his briefly, "for trusting me with your story." The simple touch, warm and fleeting, sent a jolt through Samuel that was both pleasure and pain. "What about you?" he asked, steering the conversation to safer ground. "How did a Boston lady end up teaching in a mining town in Colorado?" Vivian leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at her lips. "The short version is that I refused to marry the suitable gentleman my parents had selected for me, causing something of a scandal in our social circle. When they died last winter, I found myself with modest means and limited options. Aunt Harriet's invitation seemed like providence." "And the long version?" Samuel prompted, sensing there was more to the story. Vivian's smile widened. "That would take hours and possibly involve some rather unladylike language when describing my former suitor." Samuel laughed, imagining proper Vivian Ross using colorful language. "I have time if you do." For a moment, it seemed she might accept the invitation to extend their conversation, but a glance at the schoolroom clock changed her mind. "Another time, perhaps. I promised Aunt Harriet I'd help with the church quilting circle this evening." As they gathered their notes and prepared to leave the schoolhouse, Samuel gathered his courage. "Vivian, I was wondering if you might, that is, would you consider—" The schoolroom door swung open, revealing Harriet Campbell. "Vivian, dear, I thought I might find you here. The quilting circle is gathering early today." Her gaze shifted to Samuel. "Mr. Jackson, back from the Henderson place, I see." "Yes, madam," Samuel replied, trying not to show his frustration at the interruption. "Just discussing the proposed field trip with Miss Ross." "How convenient," Harriet said with a tight smile. "Vivian, we really should be going." Vivian glanced between her aunt and Samuel, a flash of something annoyance, regret, crossing her face before she composed herself. "Of course, Aunt Harriet." "Samuel, thank you for arranging everything with the Hendersons. Perhaps we can finalize the details over the weekend." "I'd like that," Samuel said, holding her gaze a moment longer than necessary. As Harriet ushered her niece out the door, Samuel was left alone in the schoolroom, the words he had been about to speak an invitation to dinner, just the two of them still unspoken. Martha had been right. Harriet's interruptions were too consistent to be coincidental. But her protective instincts, however well-intended, were becoming an obstacle that Samuel wasn't sure how to overcome. The field trip to the Henderson Ranch was scheduled for the following Tuesday, a crisp autumn day with clear skies and gentle breezes, perfect weather for an educational outing. Samuel arrived at the school early to help organize the transportation, finding Vivian already there, directing parents and older siblings who had volunteered their wagons and time. She wore a practical riding skirt and jacket, her hair secured in a neat bun beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The outfit was sensible rather than fashionable, but to Samuel's eyes, she had never looked more beautiful, confident, purposeful in her element among the excited children and supportive parents. "Samuel," she called, spotting him as he approached. "Perfect timing. We need to finalize the wagon assignments." For the next hour, they worked together efficiently, assigning students to various wagons, reviewing the day's schedule with parent volunteers, and addressing last-minute concerns. Samuel couldn't help but admire how Vivian handled the complex logistics with calm authority, earning the respect of even the most skeptical parents. As the caravan of wagons set out for the Henderson Ranch, Samuel rode alongside, occasionally dropping back to check on the trailing vehicles or riding ahead to ensure the path remained clear. The children's excitement was palpable, their voices carrying on the morning air as they speculated about what they would see and learn. Vivian rode in the lead wagon, seated beside Mr. Wilson, Martha's husband, who had volunteered his time and vehicle for the excursion. Several times, Samuel caught her watching him, her expression warm and appreciative. Each such glance strengthened his resolve to speak his mind, to make clear his feelings once the day's activities were concluded. The Henderson Ranch presented an impressive sight as the caravan approached a substantial main house, numerous outbuildings, corrals filled with horses and cattle, and the busy activity of ranch hands going about their daily work. John Henderson himself rode out to meet them, his weather-beaten face creased in a welcoming smile. "Welcome to Triple H Ranch," he called, tipping his hat to Vivian and the assembled students. "We've got quite a day planned for you young scholars." The field trip unfolded even better than Samuel had hoped. The Hendersons had prepared thoughtfully for their young visitors, setting up stations around the ranch where students could learn about different aspects of cattle, ranching from the business office, where Mr. Henderson kept his ledgers, to the blacksmith's forge, where horseshoes were made, to the kitchen where Mrs. Henderson demonstrated how to preserve foods for the long winter months. Samuel led a demonstration of basic cattle handling techniques, showing the older boys and a few adventurous girls how to approach livestock safely, how to read animal behavior, and even allowing them to try their hand at throwing a lasso. Throughout the morning, he was aware of Vivian moving among the groups, taking notes, asking questions, ensuring her students were engaged and respectful. At midday, everyone gathered in a shaded grove near the main house for a picnic lunch. The mood was festive, with children excitedly sharing what they had learned and parents exchanging news and gossip as they often did when gathered together. Samuel found a moment to sit beside Vivian as she finished her meal. "Seems to be going well," he observed. "The children are certainly enjoying themselves." "It's been marvelous," Vivian agreed, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Better than I could have hoped. They're learning so much, and not just about ranching." Did you see how proud Joseph Henderson was, showing the younger children how to groom the horses? "He struggles with reading, but out here, he's the expert." Samuel nodded. Different kinds of learning, different kinds of intelligence. My pa used to say that books were just one way to get smart. Your father sounds like a wise man. He had his moments, Samuel agreed, a shadow crossing his face as memories surfaced his father's farm in Tennessee, now long lost to war and taxes, his mother's grave on a hillside he hadn't visited in over a decade, his younger brother who had died at Antietam, barely 17. Vivian seemed to sense his shift in mood. "I'd like to hear more about your family someday," she said quietly, "when you're ready to share." Before Samuel could respond, Mrs. Henderson approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "Miss Ross, the children have finished eating." John thought they might enjoy seeing the new calves in the north pasture if you're agreeable. Vivian rose to her feet. "That sounds wonderful, Mrs. Henderson. Samuel, will you join us?" The afternoon continued in the same successful vein as the morning. The children were visibly tiring but still engaged, absorbing new experiences and information with the natural curiosity of youth. By the time the wagons were loaded for the return journey to Granite, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the ranch yard. As the caravan prepared to depart, John Henderson approached Samuel. "Your school teacher's something special," he said without preamble. "Got those city manners, but not afraid to get her hands dirty, and those children mind her without her having to raise her voice once." Samuel couldn't help the surge of pride he felt at the rancher's assessment, as if Vivian's success somehow reflected on him. "She is special," he agreed simply. Henderson gave him a knowing look. "Don't wait too long to tell her so, son. Good women are scarce out here, and the smart ones don't stay unattached for long." The advice, though well-intentioned, touched a nerve. Samuel was all too aware of the passage of time, of the growing connection between himself and Vivian that remained unacknowledged, of the obstacles both real and perceived that stood in the way of what he increasingly desired. The return journey to Granite was uneventful, though slower than the morning's travel as tired children dozed in the wagons and careful drivers navigated the darkening road. When they finally arrived at the schoolhouse, parents were waiting to collect their offspring, eager to hear about the day's adventures. In the flurry of activity, children being collected, wagons departing, thank yous exchanged, Samuel found himself helping Vivian gather her teaching materials and personal belongings. "I can't thank you enough, Samuel," she said as they stood outside the emptying schoolhouse. "Today would not have been possible without your help." "It was my pleasure," he replied honestly. "Seeing you with those children, teaching them, encouraging them, it's clearly what you were meant to do." Vivian's smile in response was soft, intimate. "It is fulfilling work. But I find I'm happiest when I'm writing, or when I'm with you." The confession, so simply stated, stole Samuel's breath. For a moment he could only stare at her, searching her face for any sign that he had misunderstood. "Vivian, there you are." Harriet's voice cut through the evening air as she approached from the direction of her home. "I was beginning to worry. Martha told me the wagons had returned." Samuel bit back a curse at the now familiar interruption. Vivian's expression flashed with unmistakable frustration before she smoothed it into a polite smile for her aunt. "The field trip was an unqualified success," she told Harriet. "The children learned so much, and the Hendersons were wonderful hosts." "I'm glad to hear it," Harriet said, her gaze moving between Vivian and Samuel with the now familiar assessment. "You must be exhausted, dear. Let's get you home and into a hot bath." Vivian hesitated, then turned to Samuel. "Would you join us for dinner tomorrow night? Both Aunt Harriet and I would love to hear more about your experiences at the Henderson Ranch over the years." The invitation, though including Harriet, was clearly Vivian's attempt to continue their interrupted conversation in a setting her aunt couldn't object to. "I'd be honored," Samuel said, meeting Vivian's gaze meaningfully. "What time shall I arrive?" 6 o'clock, Harriet answered for her niece. "And don't feel obligated to bring anything, Mr. Jackson. Your company will be quite sufficient." As Samuel watched the two women walk away, arm in arm in the gathering darkness, he felt a mixture of anticipation and determination. Tomorrow night, he decided, he would find a way to speak privately with Vivian, to finally give voice to the feelings that had been growing steadily since that first meeting outside Martha's store. What he couldn't have known was that fate had other plans that would test not only his resolve, but also his courage, his resourcefulness, and ultimately, his love for Vivian Ross. Samuel arrived at the Campbell house precisely at 6 o'clock the following evening, freshly shaved and wearing his best shirt and waistcoat. He had even splurged on a new necktie from Wilson's General Store, earning a knowing smile from Martha as she wrapped his purchase. The dinner began pleasantly enough, with conversation focusing on the successful field trip and the positive feedback from parents and children alike. Harriet seemed genuinely pleased with the educational outcome, though she remained reserved in her interaction with Samuel. "Several mothers mentioned how impressed they were with your patience with the younger children, Mr. Jackson," Harriet observed as she served slices of apple pie for dessert. "You seem to have a natural way with them." "My younger brother was 10 years my junior," Samuel explained. "I helped raise him after our mother fell ill." "That would explain it," Harriet said with a nod. "There's nothing like practical experience to prepare one for handling children." Vivian, who had been relatively quiet throughout the meal, looked up with interest. "You never mentioned a younger brother before. Does he live nearby?" The familiar pang of grief tightened Samuel's chest. "He died at Antietam, Confederate infantry." A heavy silence fell over the table. After a moment, Harriet spoke, her voice gentler than Samuel had ever heard it. "I lost my brother at Shiloh, Union Cavalry." Their eyes met across the table, an unexpected moment of shared understanding passing between them. "I'm sorry for your loss, madam," Samuel said quietly. Harriet inclined her head in acknowledgement. "And I for yours, Mr. Jackson." The conversation gradually recovered, moving to lighter topics as they finished their dessert and coffee. When the meal concluded, Harriet surprised Samuel by suggesting that Vivian show him her writing room while she cleared the dishes. "I insist," she said when both Vivian and Samuel offered to help. "You young people should enjoy the evening. The dishes can wait." Exchanging a puzzled glance with Vivian, Samuel followed her to the small sunroom at the back of the house. The space was clearly a writer's sanctuary, a desk positioned to capture the best light, bookshelves filled with reference materials and favorite volumes, and neat stacks of paper covered with Vivian's elegant handwriting. "Aunt Harriet has never encouraged us to be alone together before," Vivian said in a low voice as she closed the door partway. "I can't imagine what's changed." Samuel thought he understood. "Shared grief has a way of altering perspectives. Your aunt and I found common ground tonight." Vivian moved to the window, looking out at the garden now silvered by moonlight. "I'm sorry about your brother, Samuel. It must have been devastating." "It was," he acknowledged, moving to stand beside her. "For a long time, I blamed myself for not being there with him, for not protecting him as I always had." Vivian turned to face him, her expression soft with empathy. "And now I understand that some things can't be prevented, no matter how much we might wish otherwise." Samuel took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Vivian, there's something I've been wanting to tell you." Her eyes searched his face. "Yes, since the day we met, when you stood watching that stagecoach disappear with your belongings, I've felt drawn to you. in a way I can't fully explain." The words came haltingly at first, then with increasing confidence. "You're unlike anyone I've ever known, intelligent, brave, kind-hearted. When I'm with you, I feel as though the best parts of me, parts I thought the war had destroyed, are coming back to life." Vivian's eyes widened, but she remained silent, allowing him to continue. "I know there are differences between us, differences in education, in background, in prospects. And I know your aunt has concerns about my suitability." Samuel took another step closer, close enough now to catch the subtle scent of lavender that always seemed to surround her. "But I also know that what I feel for you is real and true, and I hope that you might feel something similar for me." For a long moment, Vivian was silent, her expression unreadable in the dim light of the sunroom. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, luminous with joy and relief. "Samuel Jackson," she said softly, "I have been waiting weeks for you to say those words." Before he could respond, she closed the distance between them, her hands coming to rest lightly on his chest. "I felt it too, that connection from the beginning. When you offered to find my trunks, when you returned with them despite all obstacles, when you helped with the field trip. Each time I fell a little more in love with you." The admission, so clear, so unambiguous, left Samuel momentarily speechless. When he found his voice again, it was rough with emotion. "Vivian, are you sure? I have so little to offer." "You have everything to offer," she interrupted gently. "Integrity, courage, kindness. Those are worth more than any material possessions or social advantages." With tender deliberation, Samuel raised his hand to cup her cheek. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vivian's answer was to lean forward, her eyes fluttering closed as their lips met in a kiss that was gentle at first, then increasingly fervent as months of unspoken longing found expression at last. Samuel's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while Vivian's hands moved to his shoulders, then to the nape of his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Samuel rested his forehead against Vivian's, reluctant to move away even an inch. "I love you," he said simply, the words he had held back for so long finally finding voice. "And I love you," Vivian replied, her smile radiant in the moonlight. A discreet cough from the doorway startled them apart. Harriet stood there, her expression a mixture of resignation and amusement. "I see you two have finally come to an understanding," she observed dryly. Samuel straightened, prepared to defend their feelings, but Vivian spoke first. "Aunt Harriet, I love Samuel. I believe he will make me very happy, and I hope you can accept that." Harriet studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. "I suspected as much weeks ago. You're not as subtle as you think, either of you." She fixed Samuel with a stern look. "I still have concerns, Mr. Jackson, but I also recognize a lost cause when I see one. And it seems my niece's heart is irrevocably decided." "Yes, it is," Vivian confirmed, reaching for Samuel's hand. "Then I will not stand in your way," Harriet said with a nod that seemed to cost her some effort. "But I do expect proper courting, is that understood? No more unchaperoned moments like the one I just interrupted." "Yes, madam," Samuel agreed readily, hardly able to believe the sudden removal of what had seemed an insurmountable obstacle. Harriet's expression softened slightly. "You're a good man, Samuel Jackson. I've known that for some time. I just needed to be sure you were the right man for Vivian." "And am I?" Samuel asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. A small smile touched Harriet's lips. "I believe you might be, yes." She gestured toward the parlor. "Now, shall we have some more coffee and discuss this courtship in a more appropriate setting?" As they followed Harriet from the sunroom, Samuel squeezed Vivian's hand gently, still marveling at the turn events had taken. What had begun with a lost trunk had led to a found heart his own, awakened from its long dormancy by the remarkable woman at his side. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Samuel's life. With Harriet's grudging blessing, he and Vivian embarked on a proper courtship, attending church socials together, taking chaperoned walks on Sunday afternoons, and sharing dinner at the Campbell house several times a week. As autumn deepened toward winter, Vivian continued to flourish in her role as Granite's schoolteacher. Her innovative teaching methods and genuine concern for her students earned her the respect of even the most skeptical parents, and her classes grew as families from outlying homesteads sent their children to town for education. Samuel, meanwhile, found steady work with John Henderson, who offered him a permanent position as ranch foreman. The role came with a small cabin on the property and a salary that, while modest, provided financial stability Samuel hadn't known since before the war. "It's a step up," he told Vivian as they walked through town one crisp November afternoon, Harriet following at a discreet distance. "A real future to offer." Vivian squeezed his arm affectionately. "I told you I don't care about material things, Samuel." "I know," he acknowledged, "but I care. I want to provide for you to give you a comfortable life." "As long as we're together, I'll be comfortable," she assured him. But her eyes brightened at the description of the cabin, snug and well-built, with a stone fireplace and windows that faced the mountains. Their courtship proceeded at a pace that satisfied propriety while testing both their patience. Each parting was more difficult than the last, each greeting more joyful. They shared their histories, their dreams, their fears, building a foundation of understanding and mutual respect that deepened their love. Vivian told Samuel about her sheltered upbringing in Boston, her quietly rebellious spirit that had led her to pursue education beyond what was considered necessary for a young lady, and her refusal to marry the wealthy but arrogant banker her parents had chosen for her. "They never understood why I couldn't be content with the life they planned for me," she explained during one of their walks. "A comfortable home, social standing, financial security, those were the measures of success in their world." "And in your world?" Samuel asked. Vivian's eyes lit with the inner fire he had come to cherish. "Freedom to make my own choices, work that matters, love based on genuine connection rather than convenience or advantage." She looked up at him, her expression tender. "The very things I've found here with you." Samuel, in turn, shared more about his past, his childhood on a small Tennessee farm, his hasty enlistment after news of Fort Sumter, the gradual disillusionment as the war dragged on, and its true costs became apparent. "I came west to forget," he admitted one evening as they sat on the Campbell porch, wrapped in blankets against the November chill. "But you can't outrun your memories, not really. They travel with you." "Do you regret it?" Vivian asked softly. "Coming west?" Samuel shook his head. "Never. Especially now." He took her gloved hand in his. "Everything I experienced, every choice I made, it all led me to that moment outside Martha's store, to you." As December arrived, bringing with it the first heavy snows of the season, Samuel found himself increasingly preoccupied with thoughts of the future, specifically a future with Vivian as his wife. The idea both thrilled and terrified him. Despite their deepening relationship and Harriet's apparent acceptance, he still harbored doubts about his worthiness, about whether he could truly make Vivian happy in the long term. These doubts were put to the test one snowy afternoon when he arrived at the schoolhouse to escort Vivian home. The students had been dismissed early due to the worsening weather, but Vivian remained at her desk grading papers. "You're a welcome sight," she said, smiling up at him as he stamped snow from his boots. "I was just about to brave the blizzard alone." "Couldn't have that," Samuel replied, warming his hands by the small stove that heated the schoolroom. "The wind's picking up something fierce. We should get you home before it gets worse." As Vivian gathered her materials, Samuel noticed a letter on her desk, its Boston postmark clearly visible. Something in his expression must have revealed his curiosity, for Vivian picked up the letter with a small smile. "News from home," she explained. "Or rather, from my former home. Mr. Whitfield, my parents' lawyer, writes that the family house has finally sold. The proceeds, added to my inheritance, amount to a rather substantial sum." Samuel digested this information, unsure how to respond. Money had never been a significant factor in their relationship, but he couldn't help wondering if this change in Vivian's circumstances might alter her perspective on a future with him. "That's good news, I suppose," he said carefully. Vivian studied his face, her own expression suddenly serious. "Samuel Jackson, are you worried that money might change how I feel about you?" Her direct questioning, as always, cut straight to the heart of the matter. "The thought crossed my mind," he admitted. "Financial independence gives you options. You might find that what? That I suddenly prefer the company of wealthy Bostonians to the man I love." Vivian shook her head, exasperation clear in her gesture. "After all we've shared, do you truly believe my feelings are so shallow?" "No," Samuel said quickly. "But I can't help wondering if someday you might regret choosing a simple life with me when you could have had so much more." Vivian's expression softened. She set aside the letter and moved to stand before him, taking both his hands in hers. "Samuel, listen to me carefully. I left Boston because that life, the life of social obligations and marriages based on advantage, suffocated me. I found myself here in Granite. I found purpose in my teaching, joy in my writing, and love with you." She squeezed his hands, emphasizing her points. "No amount of money could ever replace what we've built together." The sincerity in her voice, the unwavering certainty in her eyes, finally penetrated the wall of Samuel's insecurity. "I love you, Vivian Ross," he said, drawing her into his arms, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, her voice muffled against his coat. "Now, shall we brave this blizzard together?" The weather had indeed worsened during their time in the schoolhouse. Snow fell in thick, swirling sheets, and the wind howled down the main street of Granite, driving the cold through even the thickest clothing. Samuel wrapped Vivian's scarf more securely around her face, leaving only her eyes visible, then offered his arm for the walk to her home. They had progressed perhaps halfway when the wind suddenly intensified, bringing with it a blinding wall of snow that reduced visibility to almost nothing. Samuel pulled Vivian closer, shielding her with his body as best he could. "We should take shelter," he shouted over the howling gale. "The church is closest," Vivian nodded, her eyes wide above her scarf. Together they changed direction, stumbling through deepening snow toward the small clapboard church that served as Granite's spiritual center. The church door, thankfully, was unlocked, a policy instituted by Reverend Thomas, who believed that sanctuary should be available to all at any time. Samuel ushered Vivian inside, then pushed the heavy door closed against the force of the wind. The interior was cold but blessedly free from the driving snow and howling wind. A few candles burned near the altar, left lit for those seeking spiritual comfort. Their flickering light cast long shadows across the empty pews. "Well," Vivian said, unwinding her scarf and shaking snow from her hair, "this is certainly an adventure." Samuel couldn't help but laugh at her characterization. "Only you would call being caught in a blizzard an adventure, Vivian Ross." "Life is what you make of it," she replied with a smile. "And I choose to see the positive aspects of our situation. We're safe, We're together, and she gestured around the empty church. We have some privacy for once. The last observation, delivered with a mischievous gleam in her eye, sent a jolt of awareness through Samuel. They were, indeed, completely alone for the first time in weeks, with no Harriet to interrupt at strategic moments. "We should light more candles," he said, deliberately focusing on practical matters, "and see if there's any firewood for the stove." They set about making the church as comfortable as possible for what might be an extended stay. Samuel found a small stack of firewood in a storage room, and soon had the pot-bellied stove in the back corner giving off welcome heat. Vivian discovered a chest containing blankets and pillows kept for the occasional overnight prayer vigils. "Not exactly the Campbell parlor, but it will do," Vivian said as they settled on a pew near the stove, blankets wrapped around their shoulders. Outside, the storm continued unabated, snow piling against the windows and wind rattling the old wooden structure. "Your aunt will be worried," Samuel observed, though he made no move to leave their shelter. "She'll assume we stayed at the school or found shelter elsewhere," Vivian assured him. "Aunt Harriet is very practical about such things." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, watching the play of shadows on the walls as the candles flickered in occasional drafts. Samuel was acutely aware of Vivian beside him, her warmth, her scent, the graceful curve of her neck visible above the blanket. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, catching him watching her. "How beautiful you are," he answered honestly. "And how fortunate I am." A blush colored her cheeks, visible even in the dim light. "You make me feel beautiful. Not just with your words, but with the way you look at me, the way you listen when I speak, the way you value my thoughts and dreams." Samuel reached for her hand beneath the blanket, entwining their fingers. "I've been thinking a lot about those dreams lately, about our future." "Have you?" Vivian turned slightly to face him, her expression expectant. Samuel nodded, his heart suddenly racing. This wasn't how he had planned it. He had imagined a more romantic setting, perhaps a special dinner or a sunset ride. But as he looked into Vivian's eyes, glowing amber green in the candlelight, he knew that the moment was right, regardless of the setting. "Vivian, I came west seeking a new beginning, but I never imagined finding someone who would make that new life worth living in every way." He shifted, turning fully toward her and taking both her hands in his. "You've brought light and purpose and joy back into my world. I can't imagine a future without you in it." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Samuel, let me finish," he said gently. "I know I'm not what your parents would have chosen for you. I'm not wealthy or educated or connected to society. But I promise you this. I will love you completely, support you unconditionally, and cherish you above all others for as long as I live." With that, Samuel slipped from the pew onto one knee, still holding Vivian's hands. "Vivian Elizabeth Ross, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" For a heartbeat, Vivian was silent, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Then, with a joyous laugh that echoed in the empty church, she launched herself into his arms, nearly knocking him backward. "Yes," she breathed against his ear. "Yes, Samuel Jackson, I will marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever you wish." Their lips met in a kiss that expressed all the love, longing, and promise that words could not convey. Samuel held Vivian as if she were the most precious treasure in the world, which to him she was. When they finally parted, both were breathless and flushed. "I don't have a ring," Samuel admitted, suddenly remembering this crucial detail. "I was saving for one, but I don't need a ring," Vivian interrupted, her hands framing his face. "I only need you." They remained in the church throughout the night, talking, planning, dreaming of their future together. As the storm gradually abated, and the first gray light of dawn filtered through the snow-covered windows, they found themselves curled together on a makeshift bed of pews and blankets, Vivian's head resting on Samuel's shoulder. "When shall we tell Aunt Harriet?" Vivian asked, her voice drowsy with approaching sleep. "As soon as we can safely reach your home," Samuel replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "though I suspect she's been expecting this announcement for some time." Vivian chuckled softly. "She has. She told me weeks ago that she was resigned to having a former rebel soldier as a nephew-in-law." The casual revelation startled Samuel. "She said that, hum. She also said that while you weren't her first choice, you were clearly mine and she trusted my judgment." Vivian tilted her head to look up at him. "She sees the good in you, Samuel, as do I." Warmed by this knowledge, Samuel held Vivian closer, marveling at the path that had led them here from a chance meeting sparked by lost luggage to a love that promised to sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. When they finally emerged from the church later that morning, they found Granite transformed into a winter wonderland, with deep snow blanketing the streets and buildings. Hand in hand, they made their way to the Campbell house, where Harriet awaited with barely concealed relief and knowing looks. The announcement of their engagement was met with congratulations from Harriet, and when the news spread throughout Granite, with general approval from the townspeople who had watched their courtship unfold. Martha Wilson was particularly pleased, claiming partial credit for bringing them together. "If I hadn't asked Samuel to retrieve your trunks, who knows if you two would have ever properly met," she told Vivian with a wink. Winter settled fully upon the Colorado mountains, but the cold days and long nights could not dim the warmth and joy that Samuel and Vivian found in their shared future. They set a wedding date for early spring, when the snow would begin to melt, and the first wildflowers would appear, a time of renewal and beginnings that seemed fitting for their union. In the months leading to their wedding, they continued to build their life together. Samuel worked diligently at the Henderson Ranch, saving every spare dollar and preparing the foreman's cabin for Vivian's arrival. Vivian divided her time between teaching, planning their wedding, and working on her novel, which was nearing completion. Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and new growth. The entire town of Granite turned out for the ceremony, filling the small church to capacity. John and Margaret Henderson attended as Samuel's honored guests, while Harriet stood proudly beside Vivian, her customary reserve softened by genuine happiness for her niece. Reverend Thomas officiated, his words about love, commitment, and partnership resonating deeply with the couple who had found each other against all odds. When Samuel and Vivian exchanged their vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Even gruff old miners who rarely showed emotion were seen dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs. "I, Samuel James Jackson, take thee, Vivian Elizabeth Ross, to be my wedded wife," Samuel said, his voice clear and steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Vivian's response was equally heartfelt, her green eyes never leaving Samuel's as she pledged her life and love to him. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel gathered her into his arms for a kiss that, while respectful of their audience, left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous and boisterous, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the county. Samuel and Vivian moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their happiness infectious. "You've done well for yourself, Jackson," John Henderson said, clapping Samuel on the shoulder. "And for what it's worth, I think she's done well, too." As the festivities continued into the evening, Samuel found a moment to lead Vivian outside, away from the noise and crowd. The spring night was cool but not cold, the sky a canopy of stars above the silhouette of mountains. "Mrs. Jackson," he said, testing the sound of her new name. "Are you happy?" Vivian's smile was answer enough, but she added words for good measure. "Completely, utterly, overwhelmingly happy, Mr. Jackson. And you?" Samuel drew her close, his arms encircling her waist. "I never knew such happiness was possible," he admitted. "I spent years believing that the best parts of life were behind me, that the most I could hope for was a quiet existence without too much pain." He touched her cheek gently. "You changed everything, Vivian. You brought color back to a world that had faded to gray." Their kiss was tender, a promise of all the days and nights to come. When they finally returned to the celebration, it was with renewed appreciation for the community that had embraced their union and the future that awaited them. Life for the newlyweds settled into a rhythm that suited them both. Samuel continued his work at the Henderson Ranch, earning the respect of the ranch hands and the trust of John Henderson, who increasingly relied on his judgment in business matters. Vivian completed the school year but resigned her teaching position afterward, choosing to focus on her writing and their home. The cabin that had once seemed small now felt just right, cozy rather than cramped, intimate rather than restricted. Vivian added touches that transformed it from a bachelor's quarters to a true home: curtains at the windows, colorful quilts on the bed, shelves of books, and simple but attractive furnishings purchased with her inheritance. "It's perfect," she insisted when Samuel expressed concern that she might miss the comforts of her previous life. "It's ours, and that makes it more valuable to me than any mansion in Boston." As summer turned to fall and fall to winter again, their love deepened, taking on the comfortable familiarity of a well-worn path while still retaining the capacity to surprise and delight. They had disagreements. Of course, Samuel's occasional brooding silence when memories of the war surfaced, Vivian's stubborn independence that sometimes led her to take risks Samuel considered unnecessary. But they learned to navigate these differences with respect and understanding. Their first Christmas as a married couple was a time of particular joy. They traveled to Granite to celebrate with Harriet, who had softened considerably toward Samuel as she witnessed his devotion to Vivian. The Campbell house was festively decorated, and the aroma of holiday baking filled the air when they arrived, stomping snow from their boots on the porch. "Merry Christmas," Harriet called, embracing Vivian warmly and extending a hand to Samuel. Come in, come in. Everything's ready." The holiday was filled with simple pleasures: a Christmas service at the church, gifts exchanged by the fire, a feast that rivaled any Samuel had experienced since his childhood. But the greatest gift awaited announcement until the meal was concluded and they were gathered in the parlor with cups of hot cider. "Aunt Harriet," Vivian began, her voice slightly tremulous with excitement, "Samuel and I have some news to share." Harriet set down her cup, her expression instantly alert. "News? What sort of news?" Vivian glanced at Samuel, who nodded encouragingly. "We're going to have a baby," she said, her face radiant with happiness. "In late spring." Harriet's response was immediate and joyous. She enveloped Vivian in a tight embrace, tears welling in her usually composed eyes. "Oh, my dear girl, I'm so very happy for you. For both of you," she added, including Samuel in her gaze. The remainder of the evening was spent in excited discussion of the coming child: preparations needed, possibilities for names, hopes and dreams for the future. When Samuel and Vivian finally departed for their cabin, promising to return for New Year's, Harriet embraced her nephew-in-law with genuine affection, "Take care of her, Samuel," she said softly, "and of yourself. That child will need both its parents." "I will, Mrs. Campbell," he promised solemnly, "with everything I have." The winter passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. Samuel added a small room to the cabin for the baby, working in the evenings and on his days off. Vivian sewed and knitted, creating a layette that reflected her practical nature and her artistic sensibilities. Friends and neighbors, hearing of the coming addition to the community, contributed handmade items and practical advice in equal measure. Spring arrived with its usual drama in the Colorado mountains, days of brilliant sunshine, alternating with sudden snowstorms. The landscape gradually transforming from white to green as nature awakened from its long sleep. Vivian, now in her final month of pregnancy, found the changeable weather matched her own shifting moods, excitement giving way to apprehension, joy to uncertainty, anticipation to impatience. Samuel watched over her with loving concern, arranging for her to stay in Granite with Harriet during the final weeks, where medical help was more readily available should complications arise. The separation, though necessary, was difficult for both of them. Samuel rode to town whenever his duties allowed, sometimes arriving late in the evening and departing before dawn to return to the ranch. It was during one such brief visit in early May that Vivian's labor began. Samuel had just bid her good night and was preparing to return to the ranch when Vivian gasped, her hand flying to her abdomen. "Samuel," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of pain and wonder, "I think it's time." The hours that followed tested Samuel's composure in ways that even the worst battles of the war had not. He sent for the midwife, Mrs. Thornton, a capable woman who had delivered most of Granite's children over the past decade. Harriet, surprisingly calm in the crisis, prepared the birthing room while Samuel paced the parlor, every cry from upstairs piercing his heart. "Women have been doing this since Eve, Mr. Jackson," Mrs. Thornton told him firmly when he inquired for the dozenth time about Vivian's progress. "Your wife is strong and healthy. Try to have faith." Faith was easier counseled than practiced, but Samuel did his best, alternating between pacing, prayer, and periods of sitting with his head in his hands, remembering every moment of his life with Vivian and promising all manner of sacrifices, if only she and the baby would be safe. Dawn was breaking when the cry of a newborn finally shattered the tense silence of the Campbell house. Samuel, who had been dozing fitfully in a chair by the fire, jerked awake, his heart pounding as he stared at the staircase, waiting. Mrs. Thornton appeared a few minutes later, her lined face creased in a broad smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Jackson. You have a fine, healthy son." Relief and joy washed over Samuel in equal measure. "And Vivian?" "Is she tired but well?" the midwife assured him. "She's asking for you." Samuel took the stairs 2 at a time, pausing only briefly outside the bedroom door to compose himself before entering. The sight that greeted him was one he knew he would carry in his heart until his dying day. Vivian, pale but radiant, propped against pillows with a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Samuel," she said, looking up with tired eyes that nonetheless shone with happiness, "come meet your son." He approached the bed on unsteady legs, sinking carefully onto the edge beside his wife. The baby's face was tiny and perfect, his skin still flushed from the effort of being born. A shock of dark hair, Samuel's hair, topped his head. "He's beautiful," Samuel whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the infant's cheek. "Just like his mother." Vivian laughed softly. "I think he favors you, actually, but we'll see as he grows." She shifted slightly, offering the bundle. "Would you like to hold him?" With reverent care, Samuel took his son into his arms, marveling at his smallness, his completeness, the miracle of his very existence. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your pa." The baby's eyes, unfocused but alert, seemed to study Samuel's face. A tiny hand escaped the swaddling, fingers flexing in the air until Samuel offered his own finger, which the infant grasped with surprising strength. "What shall we call him?" Vivian asked, watching the interaction with evident pleasure. They had discussed names during the long winter evenings but had never settled on a final choice. Now, looking at his son's face, Samuel knew. "Thomas," he said softly, "after my brother, if that's all right with you." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes. "It's perfect," she agreed. Thomas James Jackson. As the morning light strengthened, filling the room with golden warmth, the new family shared a moment of quiet togetherness, Vivian leaning against Samuel's shoulder, the baby now sleeping peacefully in his father's arms. Outside, birds sang in the trees around the Campbell house, and the distant mountains stood sentinel as they had for millennia. "I never thought I could be this happy," Samuel confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "When I came west, I was just trying to outrun the past, to find a place where I could exist without the weight of all I'd seen and done during the war." "And now," Vivian prompted gently. Samuel looked down at his sleeping son, then at his wife's beloved face. "Now I understand that the past doesn't define us. It's part of us, yes, but so is the present and the future we create together." He pressed a kiss to Vivian's forehead. "You gave me that gift, Vivian, the ability to look forward rather than back." "We gave it to each other," she corrected softly. "And now we'll give it to Thomas. A future full of possibility and love." As the days and weeks passed, Samuel and Vivian adjusted to their new roles as parents. Thomas proved to be a generally good-natured infant, though he had definite opinions about when he should be fed, changed, or held. Vivian recovered her strength quickly and was soon eager to return to their cabin at the Henderson Ranch. "Are you certain you're ready?" Harriet asked, concerned. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need." "I'm ready," Vivian assured her. "Samuel has prepared everything, and while I appreciate your hospitality more than I can say, I'm anxious to begin our life as a family in our own home." The return to the ranch was a homecoming in the truest sense. Samuel had indeed prepared everything, enlisting the help of Mrs. Henderson to ensure that the cabin was equipped for a newborn. A cradle handcrafted by John Henderson stood beside their bed, a rocking chair waited by the fireplace, and the nursery was painted a cheerful yellow that reminded Vivian of sunshine. "Oh, Samuel," she breathed as she explored the changes. "It's wonderful, all of it." Life settled into a new rhythm, centered around Thomas's needs but still finding space for the pursuits that gave Samuel and Vivian individual satisfaction. Samuel continued his work as foreman, though he arranged his schedule to be home more often. Vivian cared for Thomas while continuing her writing, sometimes with the baby sleeping beside her desk or nestled in a sling across her chest. The completion of her novel was a triumph celebrated by the entire household. Westward Hearts was finally ready to be submitted to publishers, its pages reflecting not only Vivian's talent, but also her experiences, the journey west, the discovery of love, the building of a new life in a place both harsh and beautiful. "I couldn't have written this without you," she told Samuel as they packed the manuscript for posting. "Without what we found together." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the Jackson family's life expanded to include new friends, new experiences, and new challenges. Samuel's position at the Henderson Ranch brought increasing responsibility and reward, while Vivian's novel found a publisher in Denver who recognized its authentic voice and compelling narrative. The arrival of the first printed copy of Westward Hearts was an occasion for celebration. Samuel insisted on reading it from cover to cover, despite his initial embarrassment at recognizing aspects of himself in the rugged hero. "You've captured it perfectly," he told Vivian when he finished the final page. "The vastness of the land, the way it changes those who come to it, the redemption that can be found in love and purpose." "I had excellent inspiration," she replied with a smile, glancing at Thomas, who was now attempting to stack wooden blocks with more enthusiasm than skill. Life, of course, brought its share of difficulties. A harsh winter challenged the ranch's resources, illness occasionally visited their home, and the demands of work and parenthood sometimes left little energy for romance. But through it all, Samuel and Vivian maintained the connection that had drawn them together: a deep respect for each other's strengths, a tender understanding of each other's vulnerabilities, and an abiding love that only grew stronger with passing time. As they celebrated their 5th anniversary, with Thomas now an active 4-year-old and a daughter, Elizabeth Harriet, just learning to walk, Samuel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "Who would have thought," he mused as they sat on the porch of their now expanded cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, "that a stagecoach leaving without your luggage would lead to all of this?" Vivian leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his in the gathering dusk. "Perhaps it was fate," she suggested, "or providence, the right person in the right place at the perfect time." "Maybe so," Samuel agreed, squeezing her hand gently. "Or maybe it was simply the beginning of the best story either of us will ever know, one we're still writing together, day by day." As darkness settled over the Colorado mountains, stars appearing one by one in the vast sky, Samuel and Vivian Jackson sat in companionable silence, surrounded by the life they had built from an unlikely beginning, a life rich in love, purpose, and the quiet joy of being exactly where they were meant to be together.